Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you how to draft this simple female shirt with a palazzo trouser. If this is something you like, please stick to the end of the video and don't forget to hit on the subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up. So let's dive right into today's video. So here is the pattern that I'm working with, and the first thing is to mark out all our basic measurements. So the first measurement I'm going to mark is to go ahead to mark out our button allowance for this particular dress. So I'm making use of 2.5 inches. You can make use of 2 to 3 inches if you like. So after that, I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler and I'm going to connect, drawing a straight line. After that, you want to go ahead and mark all your basic measurements. So I will be marking my shoulder to bust, shoulder to waist. So this particular pattern is not making use of an under bust, and the top length I'm using is 24.5 inches, and I'll also go ahead to add my folding allowance to it, probably when I'm cutting it out. So after marking all these measurements down, I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler and I'm going to go ahead to rule a straight line at those points. After I'm done doing that, I'll go ahead and I will label as bust, waist and top length. So now we're going to go ahead and mark our shoulder divided by 2. So my shoulder divided by 2, I have 7. Adding half inch to this pattern because we're adding a sleeve to the dress, I have 7.5, and I'll go ahead to mark 1 inch down. Now I'll mark my neckline, which is 3 by 3 inches. We are making use of the standard neckline for this pattern. I'll place my curve rule and I'll go ahead to connect. Now from that point, I'll connect it down to my neckline, marking out my shoulder slope or my shoulder slant. After that, we're going to go ahead to mark our chest line. Now to get your chest line or your armhole is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. For a plus size, you can do your bust divided by 6 plus 2 inches to give you more space. Now I'm going to mark out that point at my chest line, and I'll mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus half, just like we did at the shoulder. Now I'm going to go ahead to connect, and we're going to divide what we have here. Fold your tape into 2 and get the midpoint. From that point, go in by half. Now you're going to mark your bust circumference divided by 4, starting from the button allowance. Now I'm going to place my curve rule, connect to the half inch at the armhole, and I'm going to connect it down to the shoulder line. So after connecting, I'm just going to go ahead to use my marker to mark it out so that it's going to be more visible for you to see. After I'm done marking out, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and extend that line. That is my neckline, the 3 inches depth, applying it to the button allowance. Now the next thing you want to do is to go ahead and mark your measurements. So all my measurements is starting after the button allowance. Now I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and at the waistline I'll go ahead and mark my waist circumference divided by 4. After marking all those measurements, I'm going to place my ruler and I'm going to connect from my bust down to the waistline and down to my top length. So I'm going to connect. After I'm done connecting, now I'll be marking the sewing allowance. So since it's a shirt and you don't want it to be too fitted on the body, I'll be adding 1 inch for ease and then half inch for sewing allowance, making it 1.5. So I'll go ahead and add 1.5 to all these parts of my pattern, and after marking 1.5, I'm going to go ahead to reconnect it back, starting from the chest line to the bust and to the waist down to my hip point or the top length. So after marking, you notice that the waistline is too pointy or like too curvy. I'm going to just blend it because you don't want to have that sharp curve at that point. So now I'm just going to go ahead and connect, but if yours is not too curvy, just go ahead and work with what you have. Now I'm going to cut this pattern and I'm going to use it to cut out the back pattern of this dress. So before I start cutting, I'm going to go ahead to fold this in this way, and after folding it, I'll go ahead and I will cut out this pattern. So at this point, If you have any question regarding this video, please leave the question at the comment section, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button. So after cutting it out, this is what it looks like, and I'll go ahead to use this to cut out my back pattern. So to cut out my back pattern, this is what I have, and if you notice, I marked a line that is about 2 inches. Why did I mark this line? We are going to take out 1 inch from the front and we are going to replace it from the back. So before we start cutting this out, I'm going to go ahead to pin and make sure that the shoulder of your front pattern is exactly on that line, which is that 2 inches line. So while cutting the back pattern, we want to go ahead and reduce the neckline for the back. So for the front, we use 3 by 3 inches. For the back, we are going to use 3 by 1 inch. That is, the depth of the neckline will be 1 inch, and I'll place my ruler and I'm going to connect this way. So the back does not have a zipper allowance at that point, and you just want to cut it out. So after doing this, we're going to go ahead to trace out all the pattern of the front, like the front pattern. We are just going to trace it. So I'm just going to follow what I have on the body of the front pattern, and I'm going to trace out. After I'm done tracing out, I'm just going to go ahead to cut some parts of this dress. So while cutting out, I'm not going to touch the upper part because we're still going to adjust that part. So I'm going to take out the front pattern for you to see what we have at the back. So this is the back pattern here, and this is what it looks like. So you can see the 2 inches up. So now, just like I said, we are going to go ahead and minus 1 inch from the shoulder of the front pattern, and we're going to replace it by adding it back to the back pattern. So now I'll go ahead and mark 1 inch at this point, and I'm going to go ahead to use my ruler to draw out a straight line, and this 1 inch we're going to go ahead to cut it out. So after cutting out my pattern, this is what I have, and I've gone ahead to open it up to show you what it looks like. So the next step now is to go ahead to work on the back pattern. So we'll be adding back that 1 inch we took out from the back pattern. So I'll also measure my shoulder here and make sure that the shoulder I have at the front pattern is the same thing I have at the back pattern, and I'm going to go ahead to place and connect. I'll make sure I have exactly 1 inch at both sides, and I'm going to connect this way. So this is what my pattern looks like, and I'm just going to go ahead to cut it out and also cut the rest of the pattern now. So this is what my back pattern looks like. Now we'll be bringing the front pattern to place it together. So placing the armhole together and folding this over. So this is what my front pattern looks like, and you notice that the shoulder is not really meeting, so I'll just trim out that excess I have on that part. So next we'll move over to cut out our palazzo pants. So the first measurement to make while cutting your trouser is to fold your trouser with your lap measurement divided by 4 plus 2 or 3 inches. After that, you're going to mark your waist to hip point. So now I'm using my crotch as also my hip point. You can go ahead and mark your hip point at your crotch. So to get your crotch is your hip circumference divided by 4. Or you sit and take your measurements on a flat surface. After that, I went ahead to mark my waist to knee point. After marking my waist to knee point, which is about 21 inch, I'll go ahead to mark my trouser length, which is 40 inches. And after ruling a line at that point, I'll go ahead to mark extra 2 inches, which will serve as a folding allowance for the trouser at the lower part. So now all those lines that I marked, which is the knee point and the hip points, I'm going to go ahead and connect. So just like I said, I'm using my crotch also as my hip depth. So now the next thing you want to do is to go ahead and mark your hip circumference divided by 4. So I have trouser tutorials on my channel. For this particular pattern, I'm using another approach. So if you don't understand this, you can go ahead and check out my other tutorials. So I'll mark my front crotch extension, which is 2.5 inches. How I did that was dividing my hip circumference by 4. Whatever you get, you're also going to divide it by 4 again. So let's say your hip is 40 divided by 4, you have 10. 10 divided by 4, you're going to have 2.5. So that's what I marked in front of my hip. So now you're going to measure what you have at that point. That is what you have at that your hip point. My hip point is 10 plus that 2.5, I have 12.5. Dividing it by 2, I'm going to mark it all the way down. So what I have divided by 2 is approximately 6.3, and I'm going to mark it all the way down to my trouser pattern. So I hope you're understanding, but if you don't understand any points that I made, please go ahead and leave your question at the comment section. So now I'm going to go ahead to draw a straight line down to that point. So how did we get this mark we are making? Remember, my hip is 40 divided by 4. I have 10 plus my front crotch extension, which is 2.5, making it 12.5. So dividing it into 2, that is how I got this 6.3. So it's actually 6.2 something, but approximating it, I have 6.3. So I'll go ahead and extend it up. So now I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect from my 2.5 front crotch extension to the line I have at that point. So remember, that line is actually my hip circumference divided by 4, giving me 10. So I'll go ahead to label my pattern. So after that, I'll go ahead and come down by 2 inches. At these 2 inches, I'll be marking my tie line. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw a straight line at this point. So now we'll start imputing our measurement. So my tie or my lap measurement is 26 inches. 26 inches divided by 2, I have 13. So that 13 now, I'm going to share it into 2. So I'm just going to place, and I will mark one part at the other side and mark the other part at the other side. This is just to have even distribution of your measurements at both sides. So moving down to the knee point, you want to go ahead and measure what you have around your knee. So what I have around my knee is 18 divided by 2, I have 9. So 9 divided by 2, I have 4.5, and I'm going to go ahead to mark 4.5 at both sides. So now, if you notice on this pattern, I'm not actually adding any allowance on it. All my allowance will be at the back pattern. So after that, I'll go ahead to connect all the lines that I have made so far. So after this, to mark my measurement at this point, I'll come in by ½ inch first. So this is to make sure that one side does not have more allowance than the other. From there, I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4. Add 1 inch for my dart. I'll be adding that to the front part of this trouser, and after that, I'll go ahead and add 1 inch sewing allowance to the waist. So now, by the time I'm joining, I'll be having half on both sides. So I'm only adding the sewing allowance to the waist part of this trouser, and after that, I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect it down to the hip point of this trouser this way. So now, if your measurement is looking entirely different from mine at the waistline, that is not too bad, because everybody's measurement is different. So I'll just go ahead and remeasure what I have, and I'll just reconnect it a little at this point. Now also, I'll place my ruler, connect it from that my crotch curve down to that ½ inch we came in before we started taking our measurements. So this is what I have at this point, and now we are going to connect this remaining part to the lower part of my trouser. So since it's a palazzo trouser, I'm just going to go ahead and mark what I have at the knee measurement at the lower part of my trouser. But if you want yours to be too free, go ahead to add extra to your measurement. So I'm just going to retrace all my measurements, and I'm going to go ahead to connect it back to my pattern this way. So after reconnecting, this is what I have, and first we are going to go ahead to cut this out before we are going to create a little slope at the waistline of this trouser. So if you find this tutorial very interesting and very educative, please don't forget to hit on this subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up also if you haven't yet done that. So after this, I'm going to go ahead and remeasure my waist. It is very important for you to do so before your waistline will be bigger, because you start readjusting it. So I'll go ahead to cut out the crotch. So now going over, you want to go down by 1 inch at this point, and you're going to slant it back to your waistline this way. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. After connecting it back, the next step, you want to go ahead and retrace your measurement. Make sure what you have is your waist circumference divided by 4, your dart intake of 1 inch, and your 1 inch sewing allowance. Mine is 9 inches. After measuring it, I'm just going to go ahead to trace out. You don't want to have any excess on this point, because you have to start taking it out when you're sewing your trouser. So to draft the back pattern of this dress, I'm just going to place this on the front pattern on it. So all we are going to do is just to add measurements to it. There's no much at the back, and I'll go ahead to pin it down. So next, what you have to do is, at this point, I'll go ahead and add 2 inches in front of this part. So sorry, this pattern paper is a lot confusing. So at the crotch, I'll be adding 2.5 inches, and I will draw it out. So after doing that, those 2 inches I marked in front of my trouser, I'm going to connect it. So after connecting it, I'm going to place my ruler and I will connect. But before connecting, I will draw it out. After connecting on this part, the next step is just to go ahead and mark my sewing allowance in front of this trouser. Now I'll be marking 2 inches. So these 2 inches, one will be 7 for the front and 1 inch for the back, meaning half on both sides of the front and half on both sides of the back. So this is another way of cutting your trouser. So if you're finding this method a little difficult, you can go ahead and check other pattern on my channel. So I'm just going to mark this 2 inches down to the lower part of my trouser, and I'm going to connect. After that, I'm going to go ahead to cut out my trouser pattern. So before we go ahead and cut out, I'm going to trace out this pattern in front, and after that we'll be working on the upper part of the waistline of this pattern. So now I'm going to mark about 2.5 inches. This is to accommodate the butts at the back. So if you have a bigger butt, you can go ahead and use 3 inches. So from this point, I'm going to go ahead and slant it down to the waistline of what we have before. That is the waistline of the front pattern. So with this, your butt will be sitting very well at the back pattern of your trouser. Now, all you're going to do is to remeasure what you have in front. So what we have in front is 9 inches. Your waist circumference divided by 4, the sewing allowance at the dart allowance. Go ahead and blend it this way, and you're going to connect it to the hip line of your trouser. So after I'm done connecting to the waistline, the next step I'm going to take is to go ahead to cut out this trouser pattern. So if you really find this tutorial very interesting, please hit on the subscribe button. So I'll go ahead and cut out the back pattern, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So I'm done cutting out my trouser, and this is what it looks like. So with this, we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and see you in our next video. Thanks.